The basement vault of Frost International pulsed with emergency red light. A massive steel door remained shut, its magnetic locks humming with defiant energy. The countdown flickered. 1 minute. Madeline Frost, a billionaire CEO, stood with white knuckles, her empire crumbling. Beside her, elite experts stood paralyzed. In the dark corner, Ryan Cole, a single dad in a janitor's uniform, watched with unnerving stillness. Impatience boiled over, and Madeline pointed a finger at him. Her voice dripped with contempt. "Someone like you is just trash. Get away." Ryan looked up, eyes calm. No one knew this trash would flip their world upside down. His name was Ryan Cole, a 39-year-old man whose life had been stripped down to its most basic elements. By night, he was a ghost in a gray jumpsuit, navigating the silent, echoing hallways of Frost International with a mop and a heavy plastic bucket. To the high flyers, the aggressive young analysts, and the power-hungry executives, he was part of the architecture, an invisible laborer whose only function was to ensure their coffee stains vanished before the next morning's meeting. They looked through him as if he were made of glass, never noticing the calluses on his hands or the sharp, analytical light that occasionally flickered in his eyes when he glanced at their discarded memos. But beneath the humble exterior lay a heart fueled by a singular, desperate purpose. Ryan lived for his 7-year-old daughter, Maya. Maya was a vibrant, imaginative child who was currently trapped in a battle against a rare, chronic respiratory condition. The medical bills were a mountain that grew higher every month, requiring specialized treatments and experimental procedures that were light years beyond a janitor's meager hourly wage. Ryan didn't work this job because he lacked ambition or intellect. He worked it because the graveyard shift allowed him to be a full-time father during the day. He was the one who drove her to the clinic, the one who read her stories during long hospital stays, and the one who held her hand when the machine started to beep. He had traded his pride for the flexibility to be a parent, and he would do it 1,000 times over. However, the world only saw the uniform. They didn't know that 15 years ago, Ryan Cole was a name whispered in awe across the inner circles of global intelligence and high-stakes finance. He was a prodigy of security engineering, the man who had been recruited straight out of MIT to build the very encryption foundations that now protected the nation's wealth. He was an architect of shadows, a genius who saw systems not as code, but as living, breathing organisms. But when his wife, Sarah, passed away in a tragic accident, the corporate world lost its luster. The suits felt like straitjackets, and the boardrooms felt like tombs. He had walked away from a multi-million-dollar career to find peace in the simplicity of fatherhood, choosing the quiet rhythm of a mop over the frantic pulse of a server room. He was content to be forgotten, provided he could keep Maya safe. The woman currently insulting him was the polar opposite of his quiet world. Madeline Frost was the crown princess of finance, having taken over her father's empire at the age of 30. She was brilliant, yes, but her brilliance was shielded by a layer of arrogance that made her nearly untouchable. Madeline believed in a world of winners and losers, a strict hierarchy where status, net worth, and the brand of one's watch determined their human value. To her, people like Ryan weren't just workers. They were background noise, necessary but disposable. She prided herself on being a visionary who could see the future of the markets, yet she was utterly blind to the master of systems standing 5 feet away from her. Tonight, the stakes were higher than she had ever faced. The vault of heaven, a state-of-the-art security chamber containing $100 million in physical gold bullion, and more importantly, the encrypted digital keys to a merger that would define the next decade of global energy, had suffered a catastrophic logic lock. This wasn't a standard hack or a physical breach. It was a systemic seizure where the vault's AI had perceived a phantom threat and sealed itself in a recursive loop. It was a death sentence for the deal. If the vault didn't open within the hour, the merger's time lock clause would expire, triggering a billion-dollar penalty and a cascading collapse of Frost International stock. The world's most expensive locksmiths, former NSA codebreakers, and cybersecurity gurus had been rushed to the basement. They were sweating through their bespoke suits, staring at a wall of red scrolling text that they couldn't decipher. Every minute that ticked by was a hammer blow to Madeline's legacy. Ryan stood at the periphery, leaning on his mop handle. While the experts shouted over each other and typed frantic commands into their laptops, Ryan watched the physical manifestations of the glitch. He noticed the way the magnetic seal groaned every 45 seconds, the specific sequence of the three-color LED status bar, and the way the server fans hummed in a discordant minor key. It wasn't a random error. It was a ghost-in-the-machine failsafe, a specific deep-level security loop he himself had conceptualized during his time at the reserve. He observed the primary terminal, noticing that every time the experts initiated a decryption burst, the basement's ambient temperature dropped by precisely 2 degrees. This wasn't a software failure. It was a physical defense mechanism designed to protect the hardware from high-velocity data intrusion. They were trying to break in with a sledgehammer when the system was asking for a whisper. He saw the experts making a fatal mistake. They were trying to brute force the digital encryption, but they were ignoring the mechanical feedback. The vault was designed to resist digital force by tightening its mechanical grip. The more they typed, the tighter the door locked. Ryan took a small, hesitant step out of the shadows. His voice was calm, devoid of the panic that filled the room, but it carried a weight that caused a few experts to turn their heads. If you keep trying to bypass the firewall, you're going to trigger the vacuum seal. Once the air is sucked out of that chamber, the pressure differential will weld the bolts shut permanently. You have to stop the digital assault. Madeline didn't even turn to look at him. She let out a dry, jagged laugh that was more of a sob. Did the janitor just offer a technical opinion? Marcus, why is he still in here? The lead security expert, a man named Marcus who charged $5,000 an hour, sneered at Ryan. Look, buddy, why don't you go find a spill in the lobby? This is high-level logic, not a clogged drain. We don't have time for the help's delusions. They turned back to their screens, dismissing him as an insignificant speck. Ryan retreated, his eyes fixed on the countdown clock. He began to calculate the bypass in his head, his mind moving at a speed that would have left the experts reeling. He knew exactly what was wrong, but he also knew that in this room, his uniform was a barrier more impenetrable than the vault door itself. The clock on the wall was a glowing red guillotine, now reading 45 minutes. The atmosphere in the basement had shifted from panic to a grim, funeral-like silence. The experts had exhausted every protocol in their manuals. The system was now unresponsive, the holographic display showing a skull and crossbones icon, the international symbol for a permanent hardware lockout. Madeline Frost looked like she was about to collapse. Her empire, her father's legacy, and her personal pride were all dissolving in front of her. She turned her gaze toward the corner where Ryan stood. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her mask of perfection was cracked. In her desperation, her arrogance turned into a twisted form of entertainment. If she was going to go down, she would take someone with her. You, she said, her voice shaking with a dangerous edge. The one who thinks he knows about vacuum seals. Since my million-dollar geniuses are useless, why don't you show us your expertise? She gestured toward the control console with a mock bow. But let's be clear, Ryan. If you touch that board and fail, which you will, I will personally see to it that you are charged with corporate sabotage. I'll have every security camera in this building recording your failure. I'll make sure you never even get a job sweeping a sidewalk again. You'll be out on the street with that sick daughter of yours, and you'll have no one to blame but yourself. Is that a deal you're willing to make? Or are you just a coward as well as a janitor? The experts laughed, a hollow, cruel sound. They wanted to see the lower class humiliated to make themselves feel better about their own failure. Ryan didn't flinch. The mention of Maya's safety was intended to terrify him, but instead it acted as a catalyst. He felt a familiar coldness wash over him, the engineer's zen he hadn't felt in years. He set his mop aside with a slow, deliberate movement. He didn't rush to the keyboard. Instead, he walked to the massive steel door and placed both hands against the cold surface. He closed his eyes, ignoring the whispers and the sneers. He wasn't looking at the code anymore. He was feeling the vibration of the internal motors. He was listening to the heartbeat of the vault. He's performing an exorcism, Marcus joked, leaning back and crossing his arms. Maybe he thinks if he pets the door, it'll open for him. This is pathetic, Madeline. Why are we wasting the final minutes on this? Be quiet, Ryan said. It wasn't a shout. It was a low-frequency command, vibrating with such absolute authority that the room fell into an immediate, shocked silence. Ryan opened his eyes. They were no longer the eyes of a weary father, but the eyes of a predator who had found the flaw in the prey. He reached out and touched the side of the control panel, not the keys, but the casing itself. He felt the heat signatures. He turned to Marcus. Your team is running a 128-bit brute force attack on the primary gate. That's why the secondary thermal sensors are redlining. They're creating a feedback loop that's masking the true error code. You're fighting a shadow. Disable the sensors. Madeline stepped forward, her face inches from his. The smell of her expensive perfume was suffocating. Absolutely not. Those sensors are the only thing telling us if the hardware is melting. If we shut them down, we lose all visibility. You're asking us to fly blind. You don't have the slightest clue how this architecture is layered, do you? It was built by people who actually went to school, Ryan. Ryan stepped closer, his shadow engulfing the console. Visibility is an illusion when you're looking at the wrong data points. Your sensors are programmed to interpret the vault's defensive friction as an external threat. Every time you ping the motherboard, the internal gears expand by fractions of a millimeter. You're not trying to solve a puzzle, you're trying to outrun a closing vice. Trust the silence, not the red text. The youngest expert in the room, a woman who had been frantically checking her tablet, suddenly stopped. Her eyes went wide as she scrolled through a deep-level system manual. Wait, ma'am, he's right. Look at the subroutine 404. It's a legacy bypass. If the thermal sensors detect an overload, they lock the mechanical bolts as a safety measure. Shutting them down might actually trigger the release sequence. How did he know about the Wilson Foundation? The clock hit 30 minutes. Madeline's face was a battleground of conflicting emotions. She looked at Ryan, her lips curling in a final, desperate act of defiance. Fine, if the trash wants to take the fall, let him. Kill the sensors. But remember, Ryan, when this fails, I'm calling the police. You're throwing away your life for a moment of ego. You're still just trash to me. Ryan didn't even look at her. He leaned over the console, his fingers hovering over the glass. He didn't type. He tapped a rhythmic code, a sequence of pulses that felt more like music than data. The pulsing red lights in the room began to shift, slowing down, turning from a frantic heartbeat into a steady, calm throb. If you believe that true value can never be buried by prejudice, subscribe now so you don't miss the moment that's about to silence everyone in this room. The countdown was now at 20 minutes. The tension was no longer loud. It was heavy, pressing down on everyone in the room like miles of ocean water. Ryan stopped tapping and held up a hand, a gesture so sharp it seemed to cut the air. Everyone, absolute silence. I need to hear the mechanical engagement of the third-tier tumblers. He leaned his head against the cold, reinforced steel. The billionaire CEO, the high-priced experts, and the silent security guards watched him with an intensity that bordered on religious. Ryan was no longer the man who emptied their trash. He was a conductor at the podium, a surgeon at the table. He radiated a level of focus that was terrifying. He was in his element, the master returning to the shadows he had built. Ryan began to input a final, agonizingly complex sequence of digits. He wasn't using the standard administrative passwords. He was entering ghost keys, codes that were never meant to be used, hidden deep in the kernel of the system's BIOS. He timed each entry to the mechanical clicks he was hearing through the steel. He was marrying the digital logic of the present with the physical engineering of the past. It was a lost art, a technique that existed only in the textbooks of the pioneers. The system's response was agonizingly slow. The screen turned white, then a deep bruised amber, then began to strobe with a violent intensity. One of the experts started to sob quietly, his nerves finally breaking as the countdown clock hit 10 minutes. It's going to lock! It's going to trigger the permanent seal! He screamed, moving to grab the console. Stay back! Ryan roared. The first time his voice had risen above a whisper. The power of it pinned the expert to the wall. Ryan's eyes never left the display. He adjusted his pace, intentionally slowing down his inputs to match the cooling cycle of the internal liquid nitrogen processors. He was navigating a minefield of logic bombs, each one capable of sealing the vault forever. At 7 minutes, the server rack behind the vault door emitted a high-pitched whine. The temperature in the room plummeted further. Madeline watched Ryan's fingers. They were moving with a blur of precision, dancing across the interface like he was playing a haunting nocturne. Every stroke was a calculated gamble against a system designed to be unhackable. At 5 minutes, the room was so quiet you could hear the blood rushing in your own ears. Madeline stood directly behind him, her breath hitching in her throat. She looked at the back of his neck, at the faded collar of his uniform, and for the first time she saw the scars of a man who had survived things she couldn't imagine. Ryan's fingers hovered over the final execute key. He took one long, slow breath. He thought of Maya's smile, of the way she looked when she was dreaming, and the life he promised to build for her out of the ashes of tonight. He pressed the key with a soft, final click. The screen went black. The countdown clock stopped at 000148. For 10 long, agonizing seconds, absolutely nothing happened. The experts began to groan, some putting their heads in their hands. Madeline stepped forward, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She reached for her phone, her fingers dialing the security desk. "You failed," she hissed, her voice a jagged shard of glass. "I told you that trash only knows how to make things worse. I'm calling the police. I'm going to destroy—" Clack. The sound was small, but in the silence it felt like a tactical explosion. It was followed by a deep, heavy mechanical hum that vibrated through the floorboards and into their very bones. The massive steel bolts inside the door, 6 inches of solid tungsten, began to retract with a rhythmic, powerful series of thuds. Slowly, with an elegance that seemed impossible for its size, the vault door began to swing inward. The interior lights of the vault flickered on, revealing rows of gold bullion that glittered like fallen stars, and the glowing blue racks of the servers containing the digital future of the company. The air that rushed out was cold, sterile, and smelled of ozone. The clock remained frozen at 58 minutes and 12 seconds. Madeline stood completely still, her phone slipping from her hand and clattering to the floor. The experts were speechless, looking from the open vault to the man in the gray janitor's uniform. Ryan didn't celebrate. He didn't look for a high five. He simply reached down, picked up his mop, and with a practiced, fluid motion, wiped a small smudge of sweat off the control panel he had just mastered. He looked at Madeline, his expression as unreadable as the stars. "The vault is open, Ms. Frost. Your merger is safe." The silence that followed was heavier than the 3-ton door itself. The elite security team stood with their heads bowed, their expensive equipment now looking like toys in the hands of children. Madeline Frost, the woman who ruled with an iron fist, felt a wave of physical nausea wash over her. It wasn't just the relief of the saved deal, it was the crushing weight of her own shame. She realized she had just been rescued from professional and personal extinction by a man she had called trash only 60 minutes ago. "Verify his file," Madeline whispered to her assistant, her voice cracked and raw. "Now, I want to know exactly who this man is. I want his entire history on my desk in 30 seconds. The internal system, now fully restored and running with a smoothness it hadn't shown in months, pulled up Ryan's encrypted history. The assistant's eyes widened, her hands shaking as she read the tablet. "Ma'am, he's not just a janitor, he's Ryan Cole. He was the chief architect for the Federal Security Reserve. He's the one who designed the foundational black box protocols that our entire industry is built on. He disappeared 4 years ago. The industry thought he was dead." Madeline felt the air leave her lungs. She had been barking orders at the man who had written the literal laws of her industry's digital safety. She looked at her hands, manicured, expensive, yet utterly useless compared to the calloused, skilled fingers of the man standing before her. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been atomized. Madeline looked at the report, then back at Ryan, who was quietly gathering his bucket and mop, preparing to finish his shift in the hallway. The insults she had hurled at him, the mocking of his daughter, the threat to his life, echoed in her mind like a physical blow. She realized she hadn't just insulted a worker. She had insulted the architect of her own world. She walked toward him, her high heels clicking on the concrete floor, a sound that now lacked all its former confidence. For the first time in her career, she spoke without a script, her voice thick with a humility she didn't know she possessed. "Ryan, I apologize. To the entire team, and to you, I was wrong. My words they were inexcusable. I am in your debt." Ryan didn't look for revenge. He didn't smile at her downfall. He looked tired, not the tiredness of a man who had worked an hour, but the tiredness of a man who had carried the world on his shoulders for years. "Is my shift over, Ms. Frost? I need to get home. Maya is waiting for me to take her to her 8 a.m. appointment." "Ryan, wait," Madeline said, her voice urgent, almost pleading. "I want to offer you the position of head of global security for Frost International. Right now, name your salary, 5 million, 10 million. Whatever you want, it's yours. We need your mind. We need you to lead us." Ryan paused, his hand on the heavy door handle of the basement exit. He thought of the tailored suits, the endless meetings, the greed, and the world of glass and steel that had almost consumed his soul before Sarah died. He looked at Madeline and shook his head with a gentle, final smile. "No, I don't want the title. I don't want the office. I just want to make sure my daughter gets the surgery she needs to breathe." Madeline didn't argue. She realized that for a man like Ryan, power wasn't found in a title on a door. "Consider it done," she said, her voice firm. "The best surgeons in the world, the best care. It will all be arranged before you even get home. Just stay as a consultant, on your own terms. Work from home. Just let us call you when the world breaks." Ryan returned to work that night, but everything had changed. He still wore his gray uniform, and he still carried his mop because he found peace in the work, but no one called him a janitor anymore. When he walked through the lobby, the high-priced analyst stood up. When he entered the elevator, the brokers held the door for him. The trash they had once stepped over was now the most valued asset in the building, the man who knew the secrets of the steel. The $100 million deal was secured, but the true asset saved that night was Madeline's humanity. She changed the way she ran her empire from that night forward. She learned to listen to the people in the shadows, realizing that brilliance doesn't always wear a tie. She began to treat every employee, from the boardroom to the mailroom, with the dignity they deserved. She became a patron of the hospital wing where Maya was treated, spending her weekends sitting with families who were fighting the same battles Ryan had fought alone. The vault remained a symbol of that night, but it was no longer just a place for gold. It was a reminder that the most sophisticated systems in the world are nothing without the human spirit behind them. Madeline kept a small frame photo of Ryan and Maya on her desk, not as a trophy of a business deal, but as a compass for her character. Maya received her surgery. She began to thrive, her laughter filling their small home with a music that was more valuable to Ryan than all the gold bullion in Madeline's vault. Ryan continued to work as a consultant, helping the firm bridge the gap between their cold digital present and a more grounded human future. But his priority remained the same: being a father. A single hour in a red-lit basement had changed the lives of hundreds of people. An insult had revealed a hidden truth, and a man with a mop had proven that dignity is a choice, not a job description. The world finally saw Ryan Cole for who he truly was, not trash, but a master of his own destiny, the man who opened the vault not just for the money, but for the truth. If you believe that dignity is never trash, subscribe to follow our next stories and leave a comment. Would you stay silent or stand up if you were treated this way?